I've always loved making. When I was a kid, I used to imagine that I would someday be an inventor. Sometimes I thought, maybe I'll be a writer. At one point, I even thought I'd like to be a comedian. But whether it was making gadgets or making people laugh, it was always making. Looking at my shop now, I figure most people would assume that passion has never wavered. But that couldn't be further from the truth. This is the story of this woodworker. I will spare you the details of my younger life. All you really need to know is I was no Zach Builds. I wasn't born and thrusted into the life of building as a child. Now, that's not to say my family didn't value hard work. It's just the hard work my family dealt with was the kind that would put literal food on the table. They were farmers, among other things. But again, skipping to woodworking. My woodworking journey began sometime around the summer of 2012. I was in college and I was spending most of my free time playing video games and streaming it on Twitch. Depending on when you're watching this, Twitch used to be the dominant platform for live streaming video games. You may be saying right now, what the heck does playing video games and streaming it to a bunch of weirdos have to do with woodworking? Well, I'm getting there. You see, early on in streaming, there isn't a whole lot you can do to earn money. One thing you can do, though, is merch. So right about now, you're thinking, wow, a video gamer just started making his own wood merch? No, don't be silly. I wanted to make t-shirts. So the first thing I did was Google how to make your own shirts. I found out you pretty much have three options when making shirts. The one that caught my eye was screen printing. Here's the rub with screen printing though. To do it well, you really need a press. And shocker, presses can be a bit pricey. But then, in my searches for cheap screen press, I found it. A wooden DIY screen press. Again, I don't know when you're watching this, but wood used to be cheap. So there I was, 2x4s in hand, and all I needed was a way to cut them. No research at all. I asked the nice person wearing the red vest with the little blue logo of a house on it, what can I cut these with? They replied simply, a jigsaw should work fine. After a whopping 48 seconds of examining the prices, I walked out with a shiny new orange jigsaw that read, Black & Decker. Reflecting back on it now, this was actually a great choice for my first tool, and one I would continue to suggest. Maybe just spring for a yellow and black one instead. The tool is so intuitive. I spent zero time researching how to use a jigsaw. The entire start to finish took me about 2 hours, and at the end of it, I stepped back and thought, all right, I better go get some shirts. The building of the screen was just a means to an end. I never looked at it and thought, wow, I built that myself. In fact, I wouldn't have that thought for nearly 4 years. Does that mean I didn't use that jigsaw for the next 4 years? Absolutely not. Actually, quite the opposite. I found so many uses for it. I continued to build things to support my screen printing side hustle, like a drying cabinet for all my screens. I eventually upgraded my screen press to a more prosumer model and needed a workbench to support it. I built that using some 4x4s, some OSB for the top, and just my little old jigsaw. Let me tell you though, cutting a 4x4 with a jigsaw is no easy task. I learned about shimming table legs after that one. My interest eventually took me away from streaming and screen printing, and I found myself chasing a hobby my great-grandpa taught me, fishing. At this time, I was at my first real job in the industrial automation industry and was making pretty decent money. Decent money, but not enough to afford the 21-foot Ranger bass boat of my dreams. But I could afford a 1986 Graeger 16-foot aluminum boat with a 28 horsepower Evinrude on the back. I remember the first time I launched it into the California Delta, I thought, man, this would be perfect if it had a deck to stand on while I fish. So, me and my little jigsaw went to work. 2 days later, I had a deck that even Mr. Nitro himself would be envious of. Okay, not really, but it worked. Finally, I had that feeling of accomplishment in making something. Right? Nope, not really. Still a couple of years away from that. Fast forward to the summer of 2016. Pokemon Go took the nation by storm. The "Damn Daniel" meme echoed in every corner of the internet, and people debated whether the dress was blue or gold. But in a small Central California town, my wife and I bought our first home. It was a 1950s Rambler. It was nothing special, but it was ours and we loved it for that. Like most young couples starting out, we didn't have much. What we did have, though, was an unhealthy obsession with HGTV's Fixer Upper and a tight budget. So like many naive woodworkers before me, I thought I would take a crack at building our own furniture to save a couple bucks. Ha. I decided to start with a coffee table. You know, one of those sweet farmhouse style ones with a dark stain and iron pipe legs. So I ran down to the big orange box store and got some beautiful redwood 2x6s, some walnut stain, and all the iron pipe you'd need to plumb a small bathroom. Looking back at it now, I can certainly say the humble jigsaw was more than capable of this task. But at the time, I had been watching Chip Gaines decimate 2x4s and the like with this thing he called the miter saw. So obviously, I needed one. Again, money was a little tight, so I headed back down to the home of orange-vested angry workers and found the cheapest miter saw I could find. There it was, by itself on that end cap like a shining beacon of hope, an open box discounted 10-inch Hitachi. It wasn't anything special, it didn't have any lasers, no cutting edge dust collection, but it was mine. It was my first real power tool. And when that thing turned on, it meant business. It made short work of those soft 2x6s. I was slicing and dicing like the Muppets' Swedish chef. In a matter of a long afternoon, I was on to staining an assembled coffee table. A few hours later, I was marveling at what I had built from the comfort of my couch. Looking back at it now, it was an ugly, smelly, janky thing. But at the time, I remember thinking, I could get used to this woodworking thing. November 2019. At this point, I had taken my woodworking hobby to a new level and actually began sharing the experience with the internet via YouTube. I was having a blast making videos. I dabbled with epoxy, concrete, and of course, wood. I had no real plans of slowing down despite my wife being 9 months pregnant. I mean, I was a realist, don't get me wrong. I knew that I couldn't spend hours and hours in the shop like I had been doing. So my little monkey brain began to ponder, how could I be a dad and a woodworker? It didn't take long before I thought of a solution. If I couldn't be in the shop, I needed a replacement. Someone, or something, that could make stuff while I fed, burped, changed, and played with my infant. Can you guess what I thought of? A CNC. I spent zero time researching for the right CNC. Instagram ads told me everything I needed to know. I was going to buy an Inventables X-Carve. So I punched in the 16 numbers I found on that little piece of plastic in my wallet, and 3 weeks later, the boxes started rolling in. I sprung for the 1,000 by 1,000 millimeter bed with the dust collection arm. I won't dwell too much on the setup process as I do not want to spiral into a deep pit of depression again, but let's just say it was the opposite of a breeze. Not quite a hurricane, but maybe a strong gust that triggers a state weather advisory alert? The CNC was finally up and running the week after my son was born. For the first month or so, I was still finding time to be out in the shop. I would spend any spare time I could find designing and modeling things in Easel, the software by Inventables for the X-Carve. Then I'd try and find more spare time to go and load the CNC with some plywood and let it get to work while I hung out with my beautiful wife and baby boy. But eventually, the time I had became more and more precious, more and more rare. I wanted to be present for every moment, every snot bubble, every rollover, every dirty diaper, every bath, every giggle or laugh. I didn't have time to go out and play Mr. Wacky Woodworking YouTuber. I was Dada. And I loved it more than anything I ever loved in the world. And I didn't care that my tools would rust. Subscribers I had worked hard to gain would leave. Or my exotic woods would warp and rot. All I wanted was more time with the ones I loved, my son and his mama, and I'd give up the hobby to make sure I was there. And for a while, I did. Nearly 3 years had passed since I turned the lights off in the old workshop. We left our small hometown of California along with everything I had built and most of my tools. My son went from a drooling, babbling blob to something that resembled a small boy, albeit a bit of a reprobate at times. We got ourselves a few acres in a rural part of Washington, just an hour or so from Seattle. It had rolling hills of green in the spring and beautiful western red cedars that stood like great ancient pillars. There was a small creek at the edge of the property and a little strawberry patch my wife and son spent all summer grazing from. We found ourselves in our own little paradise. But if I'm being honest, I missed my shop. I missed the smell of freshly cut walnut, the sound of a sharp plane gliding across a piece of cherry, and the satisfaction of a water pop on some bird's eye maple. When I first took a tour of the place, I found this little 16 by 16 building nestled behind the house. It had several bunk beds in it, some ratty carpet throughout it, and plywood sheets haphazardly screwed to the walls. But I saw potential. I knew that it was small, but I was no stranger to a small place. After all, my first shop was nothing more than a single-car garage. So my wife and I had a long talk, and we both thought it'd be a good time to knock the dust off and get started making again. I was so excited. I had learned so much from the last time I had built out a shop. So I started taking inventory of what I had dragged along with me through the move. I had brought an old radial arm saw, a 13-inch planer, and a respectable amount of powered hand tools. But I knew that the heart of any wood shop was the table saw, and I was missing one. A common theme throughout my life has always been money, more specifically, the lack thereof. So I've always tried to save a buck when I can. So I took to the cool kids Craigslist, offer up. It's not really that popular anymore, but it was. I didn't find anything right away, but after about 3 weeks of checking every day, I found it. A late 1980s Delta Unisaw. After a bit of back and forth with the guy, I hooked up the trailer and drove about 45 minutes south to go check it out. And man, oh man, I was in love. So I handed the nice man 8 crisp $100 bills and headed home. Table saw, check. My shop had its heart, and with it, it started to come to life. And I think so did I. I started making things again. I started with a simple cutting board to get familiar with the tools again. Then I leveled up to a small drawing desk for my son, and eventually a big old pantry cabinet with a small space for a wall oven. I was cooking with gas, baby. But something was still missing. Sure, there were tools that I still wanted to acquire. Spoiler alert, I eventually did. But it wasn't that. It wasn't a thing at all. It was more of a feeling. I realized I was missing the feeling of what entertaining an audience did for me. The joy it brought to me to hear someone found my video funny, or how it inspired them to go and build something. I missed the feeling of being helpful to others. So again, I found myself in front of the camera. But it was different this time. You see, I had never given up the camera. In fact, in my hiatus from woodworking, I learned to appreciate my camera even more. I had to learn to be able to get a shot of a kid that could only stand still long enough to fart or throw up. And man, when you got that shot, it was like bringing the pins and tails together of a beautifully hand-cut dovetail. Pure satisfaction. So I found myself there in my shop, not with just my love of woodworking, but my love for filming and photography as well. And in that moment, I was truly content. So I released my first video back on YouTube and in the new shop on July 18th, 2022, showcasing me building my son's first big boy bed with no real plans. And I did not become an instant YouTube sensation, but I instantly knew this was something I wanted to keep doing. I wanted to keep making things. I wanted to keep filming my progress, and I wanted to share it with complete strangers. Kind of weird when I say it like that, but we're all a little strange down here. I have to be honest though, I don't always feel that way. I go through slumps like most people do. In fact, I'm learning I may go through more than the average person. But just like my wife encourages our son not to do, I won't give up. I'll keep coming back for more. As I sit here, I think to myself, what does my future look like? I have moments of grandeur where I'm some big YouTuber with millions of subscribers and a team that helps me make videos week after week. But then I take a big old swig of reality and think, what's special about me? Why would I succeed where thousands have failed? And the cold hard truth is, I don't know. I don't know if I'm special. I don't know if I'll ever be more than a blue collar worker bee. But I do know that if I do succeed, it'll be one hell of a story. So do yourself a favor, dig deep, and try. Try to be something you tell yourself you couldn't be. Try to build something you think you can't. Set a goal that is so absurd you only think of it while you sleep. Because you know what? Yeah, you may fail. You may get laughed at. People may roll their eyes at you when you tell them you want to be a YouTuber for a living. But when it all ends, you'll know you tried. And who knows? You might surprise even yourself.